It was a day like any other day. I and my children were preparing to go to the market by the Sea of Galilee. We had taken that path many times before, the children running in front and behind, laughing and playing in the tall grass as they scurried along. As we came over the crest of that hill, there the sea was before me. And it was often a scene that would take my very breath away. Yet on this particular day, I was distracted. You see, our temple, the temple, it was in shambles. The religious elite, they didn't follow the law anymore. But yet they poured upon us common everyday Jews, this burden that said that we had to do certain things and live certain ways that even they couldn't do anymore. We had to do. And we were no longer able to do the mitzvah, the good deeds that were required of us every single day. The Romans, they were everywhere. They were along the path and in the temple. Their eyes always on us, their daggers always ready. We were afraid. And then there was that Nazarene, that Jesus who showed up in all the places that we didn't want him. He broke the law. He ate with sinners and he touched the lepers. There were women that followed him. Didn't his parents teach him better than that? Didn't he know what it meant to be a good Jew? Perhaps he needed to go back to Nazareth, where he came from, because after all, nothing good came out of Nazareth anyway. And as we continued to go toward the market and my mind wandered over this, I noticed that day that there were hundreds of people on the hillside. Men and women, young and old, children, Jews, and even Gentiles. And there was that Nazarene in the middle of all of it, and I was disgusted. I heard him mutter something about how blessed you would be if you were persecuted for righteousness. And I wondered, what did he know about being righteous anyway? And he didn't know what it meant to be persecuted, but I had no doubt that one day he would know what it meant to be persecuted. And as I continued to walk by with my children, I heard him mention something from the prophet Isaiah, that great prophet who promised us good Jews, a Messiah. And so I stopped and I called my children over and we listened to what that Nazarene had to say. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until it is all accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Many people today read the Gospels, they hear messages like this, and they think to themselves, surely Jesus doesn't mean this for us today in the 21st century. He must mean that only for those people, those simple common people from back in the first century that didn't know all the things that we know today. But yet, if we look at the first century and we look at our 21st century, what we find over and over again is that we have an awful lot in common. There is still the same kind of chaos and messiness in our world today as there ever was back in the first century. The only difference that I can really find as I look at those 2 centuries or those 2 times in the life of this world is that we know a lot more about Jesus than those people knew, because after all, we have the book. We also have historians that have chronicled things for us, historians like Josephus, and some letters that have been found in archaeological digs that point to the life of Jesus and the people who followed him. But yet we share the common call with these first century people, the call of Jesus, who gave us an identity that says that we are the salt of the earth, that we are the light of the world. So if you were ever wondering about who you are supposed to be, Jesus lays it out pretty clearly right in this chapter. The other thing that we have in common with these first century people, I think, is our default mode. We have this default mode that doesn't enable us to fully embrace this call to be salt and light. And so often, instead of being salt and light, what we do is we default to comfort, conformity, and complacency. We're quick to scrutinize someone's righteousness. We're disgusted with certain groups or types of people all around us. We hope that someone else will take care of those people in need, or the ones that we are most uncomfortable with, so that we won't have to do it. But yet, to be salt and to be light requires so much more from us than comfort, complacency. It requires something from deep within us. You see, what Jesus was telling these first century people and what he's telling us today is what the prophet Isaiah told the people, the Hebrew people, much, much earlier than the Sermon on the Mount. He said to them that Israel would be the light of the world, where all people would eventually come to God's holy mountain and worship God with all their heart and mind and soul, and that they would take care of their neighbor as themselves. All people, all over the world, would come to know the love of God, and Israel would be that light that brought people to God. When Jesus says to those listeners and to us that we are now the salt of the earth and the light of the world, what he's saying to us is that we now are to draw people from all over the world, no matter where they're from and what they've done, to worship the one true God, that their lives might come to understand and know the grace of God in Jesus Christ. But how exactly do we do that if our default mode doesn't allow us to get there, if we truly haven't fully embraced what it means to be salt and light? How is our righteousness ever going to exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious rulers who day after day after day studied every single one of the laws? How can we do that? And I think we need to start with what it means to be salt and light. I think those early Christians, those early followers of Jesus, knew a little more about salt than we know about salt. right? They understood that salt and light were necessary for life. The Old Testament is filled with references to salt. Early in the scriptures, the prophet Elisha sprinkled salt into the pool at Jericho to purify the water. Later on, we read that if somebody had salt with somebody else, if you two or three were gathered together and you ate salt together, that was a sign that you had something in common. It was like the breaking of bread at the dinner table with people. It reminds me of the time that I was an exchange student in Belgium, and I sat there at the table for the first night with the family whose home I was staying in, and they poured a little bit of wine next to my plate and sprinkled salt near my dish to welcome me into their family. That I wasn't a foreigner, but I was a member of their family. Salt was used in the incense so that the aroma would spread throughout the temple. And salt was actually used as a covering for newborn babies so that some of the diseases that might affect them would be held off. Salt was necessary for life. And the Hebrew people understood that. But salt, you see, never works alone. Salt is always something that has to be mixed with something else for its full effect to take place. So what Jesus is saying to us is we're supposed to be like salt, mixed into the everyday muck, mire, joy, and laughter. And we're supposed to transform the very common things into life-giving things. We are salt. Likewise, light. Light has the power to change the environment. We know that with the power of light comes new life, that the seed springs into the tree because of light, that things that were once hidden, suddenly we can see. Now, the truth is that salt and light both also have power that could harm us. You know, if you rub salt into a wound, it hurts. And sometimes the truth, the salt, it hurts. And sometimes the things that light illuminate are things we really don't want to see. And it's not only the things that we don't want to see about those other people, it's the things we don't want to see about ourselves either. So how is it then that we become salt and light? Well, we embrace this identity that Jesus has given us. And we get into the muck and the mire, the joy and the laughter of everyday life. If you're wondering if that's even possible, what I discovered was that the early church, the church that was persecuted, the church that really had risk-taking faith, they understood what salt and light meant. In the very earliest days of the church, it is noted that those people changed their environment, not because they changed the government, but because they lived as people of salt and light, without any rules or regulations demanding that they do that. You see, they didn't just go to church on Sunday. They lived as followers of Jesus Christ. So in Antioch, there were 3,000 destitute people a day who were being fed every single day by the followers of Jesus. There were pagans who were so poor, non-believers, people of other faiths, who couldn't afford to have themselves buried, so the Christians would go out and bury the dead. The bishop in 252, Bishop Cyprian, during the plague, sent out teams of people to care for the sick and the dying, most often at the expense of their own lives, so that everybody would know what care really looked like. The Emperor Julian, almost a century later in the 300s, was so impressed by the Christians that he actually wrote a letter and said, those Christians, those followers of Jesus, not only take care of their own people, but they take care of our people as well. And he went on to describe what this looked like and then actually tried to copy the welfare system of the followers of Jesus Christ. Could you imagine our political and religious elite leaders wanting to copy the behaviors of the people of the church today? They embraced a higher calling. They embraced what it meant to live as people of salt and light. Their righteousness exceeded that of the scribes and the Pharisee. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to drive down to the Dallas Bethlehem Center, and most people don't even know that place exists, but it's southeast of the Cotton Bowl. It's not in a neighborhood many of us would normally visit. And as I was driving down there and I got off the highway, I knew I was entering an area where there were people who would need hope in that place. When I pulled into the fenced-in front yard, into this little parking lot, it didn't look like a very impressive center. And I wondered really what their mission and ministry would be in that little tiny building. But as I got buzzed into the building and I came through that front door, I realized this is an expansive place. And it exudes life and hope and joy. In that place, the volunteers and the staff come every single day to care for the most vulnerable children in that neighborhood. Babies get child care there while their parents are re-educated or given vocational training or go to work. After-school programs exist there, and the children that come to that program day after day actually now exceed the minimum standards in the state of Texas and are going far beyond that. The schools that many of these children go to now are exceptional in their testing. Children, by the time they're in middle school, who have to make the decision about dropping out of school or joining a gang or staying in school, have chosen to stay in school through high school and go on to higher education. As we went outside that afternoon to look at the community garden that helps feed these children and their families day after day, the director said to me, in our neighborhood, there are 8 known drug houses, and you could see one of them about 4 houses down the street. The closest grocery store is 3 miles away. And for every 100 homes, there is 1 car. Here is a place that is in desperate need of hope. And yet, day after day, the staff and the volunteers show up and love without judgment, who rejoice in the little successes that come when a child learns to read and speak and excel in math. Here is a staff and volunteers who exceed the righteousness of the scribe and the Pharisee by just being salt and light, for they have fully embraced the identity that Christ has called them to. What our world needs, and this is just me speaking now, what our world needs is a people who embrace the higher calling of salt and light, who do more than just show up, but actually live as followers of Jesus Christ. People who don't demand justice of others, but actually just do justice every single day. Our world needs people who don't only talk about the power of community, but actually do community with the people most unlike them. We need to consider that the life of the other is not just as important as ours, but even more important than ours. If we begin to embrace this identity as salt and light. We too can embrace the higher calling of Christ, and we too can exceed the righteousness of the religious elite. May it be so, not just on Sunday morning, but every single day.